The Night the Peanuts Spilled. Greene, New York, was the kind of town where time moved with a peculiar rhythm. Nestled among the gentle hills and meandering rivers of upstate New York, the town seemed to exist in its own bubble of warmth and familiarity. Maple-lined streets cast cool shadows across brick sidewalks, and small white fences framed lawns dotted with daisies, morning glories, and well-tended vegetable gardens. Every summer, the town green became a living theatre, a place where children ran barefoot, couples strolled arm in arm, and the townspeople congregated to celebrate music, community, and the unspoken traditions that had carried Greene through generations. It was in the 1930s, during a particularly warm summer, that the incident occurred which would forever alter the town's sense of humour and history. Thomas Delaney, a wiry man with a sprightly step and a permanent glint of mischief in his eyes, was well known in Greene for his love of peanuts. He sold them roasted fresh from his small street cart, delighting both children and adults with their rich, nutty aroma. That evening, as the town prepared for the weekly summer concert, Tom carried his paper bag of peanuts with pride, striding across the green with a confidence born of familiarity and mischief alike. The band had taken its place on the stage, the brass instruments gleaming in the evening sun. Families settled onto blankets and folding chairs, laughter spilling into the warm air like spilled lemonade, and the smell of fresh-cut grass mingled with the faint aroma of baked bread from the nearby bakery. Children chased one another between the trees, their giggles echoing across the green, and the townspeople murmured greetings to one another in a rhythm as familiar as the breeze that rustled through the maples. Thomas Delaney, for reasons known only to himself, decided that night to walk backward. Perhaps it was a whimsical impulse, a desire to amuse himself or the children who followed him at a respectful distance. Step by careful step, he moved along the green, lifting one foot, then the other, as if performing a private dance. He nibbled on peanuts as he went, tossing one or two to the grass where children eagerly snatched them up. The crowd watched with a mixture of curiosity, amusement, and mild apprehension. Some laughed quietly, whispering that Tom was always a bit eccentric. Others sighed, predicting the inevitable collision with the lemonade stand at the edge of the green. And of course, the inevitable happened. Tom's foot caught a small divot in the cobblestone path. A startled yelp escaped him as he stumbled backward into the lemonade stand. Cups toppled, pale yellow liquid spilled across the green, and peanuts flew into the air like golden sparks. There was a collective gasp, followed by a moment of stunned silence. Then laughter erupted. It started quietly, a few people chuckling nervously, but it quickly escalated into full-blown amusement. The band faltered mid-note, unsure whether to stop or continue, but eventually the melody of the waltz resumed, weaving through the laughter like a river threading through a sunlit valley. Constable Clara Haynes, the town's ever-watchful lawkeeper, arrived moments later. Clara was known for her keen eye, sharp mind, and unwavering dedication to maintaining order. But she was also known for a wry sense of humour that few outsiders could detect. She observed the spilled lemonade, the scattered peanuts, and the giggling children, her expression a careful balance of exasperation and delight. Clara had witnessed countless incidents over her decades of service, but there was something remarkable about this one. It was a small accident, yes, but it was also playful, harmless, and filled with an energy that reminded her why she loved Greene. By the next council meeting, the incident had grown into more than mere gossip. It had become a story worth preserving, even codifying. Residents spoke of it with laughter, embellishing small details, how a peanut had ricocheted off a hat, how lemonade had streamed in rivulets across the grass, how children had scrambled like tiny dancers to recover the runaway nuts. The council debated for hours, weighing humour against safety, tradition against novelty, until finally, with Clara's careful guidance, they passed a motion to make the event a legal precedent. The law, drafted with both precision and a wink, read, "It shall be a violation of public decorum within the village of Greene for any person to consume peanuts while walking in reverse motion during the performance of a concert or band engagement." The townspeople treated the new ordinance with a mixture of amusement and solemnity. Children were warned not to imitate Tom's backward walk during concerts. Vendors labelled their peanuts "forward only." The band played as if the law had always existed, incorporating subtle pauses and playful rhythms to honour the memory of that night. Over time, the story took on a life of its own. It began in whispers at the general store, spread through conversations at the diner, and found its way into letters to relatives in neighbouring towns. Visitors came, curious to witness the green, the plaque, and the ceremonial site of the backward peanut accident. Children reenacted the event under the watchful eyes of parents, who ensured that no one repeated Tom's precarious stumble. And gradually, what had begun as a small mishap became legend. Greene learned that the law's power did not lie in enforcement, but in storytelling. It became a lens through which the town viewed itself, a narrative that bound the residents together through humour, caution, and shared history. The spilled lemonade was no longer just an accident. It was a memory, a symbol of community resilience, and a lesson in turning misfortune into delight. The story travelled slowly at first. Local newspapers published small anecdotes, humour columns referenced it, and radio announcers chuckled while describing Greene as the town where peanuts and backward steps are matters of civic concern. Visitors trickled in, bringing children and cameras, hoping to witness the famous law in action. Vendors embraced it fully, marketing peanuts with playful warnings. The Greene became a stage, a playground, and a museum of memory all at once. Every summer, the rhythm of the law manifested in small, tangible ways. Children carefully practiced backward steps on the sidewalks. Families carried peanuts but monitored each other to avoid accidental transgression. And the band adjusted its timing to honor the imaginary choreography of that original stumble. Laughter echoed across the green, mingling with the brass instruments and the soft rustle of leaves. The town had turned a minor mishap into an ongoing performance, a living story that connected past, present, and future. The law also became a cornerstone of Greene's identity. Newcomers were introduced to it as part of civic education. Tourists marveled at it as part of small-town charm, and residents embraced it as a badge of humor and tradition. The backward peanut law reminded everyone that history need not be solemn or serious to be meaningful. Sometimes joy, creativity, and shared laughter were the most enduring legacies a community could cultivate. Even decades later, Greene continued to celebrate the story with ritual and care. Brass bands played familiar tunes with slight pauses. Children in peanut costumes reenacted the backward walk, and townspeople watched with affection and pride. Fireflies blinked softly in the evening air, as if acknowledging the continuity of tradition, and the Greene itself seemed to hum with the memory of laughter, spilled lemonade, and playful rebellion. In the end, the backward peanut law was more than legislation. It was a story of community, of accidents turned into legend, and of a small town that understood the value of memory, humor, and togetherness. Greene, New York, had learned that even the smallest missteps, when embraced with care, joy, and imagination, could ripple outward, shaping identity, culture, and the heartbeat of a town for generations to come. Tom Delaney's backward steps, the lemonade that once flowed across the Greene, and Constable Clara's watchful, amused gaze remained immortal in local lore. Each summer, when the band played and families gathered, it was as though time had folded, bringing past and present together in a single, joyful moment. The law itself had faded from necessity, but its spirit endured, woven into the rhythm of Greene, a town that had turned peanuts, backward steps, and spilled lemonade into legend. And in that legend, every step, every laugh, and every peanut was preserved. Greene had taken an accident, a single summer night, and created a law that was never about punishment. It was about laughter, memory, and community. And so, each summer, when the warm air drifts over the Greene and the brass notes rise into the evening sky, the town remembers the night the peanuts spilled, the man who walked backward, and the law that made it all immortal. The law becomes legend. As the weeks turned into months, the backward peanut law of Greene, New York, began to transform from an amusing ordinance into something far more substantial, a living story that shaped the rhythm of the town. The law itself, drafted with the wry precision of Constable Clara Haynes, had never been intended as a serious instrument of enforcement. Its purpose, if it could be called that, was to honour a moment of shared laughter, a minor accident, and the community that had witnessed it. Yet, over time, it became a lens through which Greene understood itself, its identity, and its unique charm. Children were the first to sense the magic of the law. They practiced careful, exaggerated backward steps along the brick sidewalks and the green's worn grass, giggling as their feet occasionally slipped or their hands clutched handfuls of peanuts that had rolled from their grasp. Teachers at the local school wove the story into history and civics lessons, explaining how one simple act, a man walking backward at a concert while eating peanuts, could leave a legacy lasting decades. Children were encouraged not to replicate Tom Delaney's stumble, but rather to understand the rhythm, the humour, and the communal delight that had turned a minor mishap into legend. Meanwhile, the adults of Greene embraced the story with warmth, amusement, and a touch of pride. Mrs. Dalton, owner of the general store for nearly 50 years, created a permanent display dedicated to the backward peanut law. A paper bag labelled "Forward Only," small photographs of children reenacting the original incident, and a miniature model of the Greene with the bandstand at its centre. Locals would stop to admire the display, adding anecdotes of their own. The time a neighbour had tripped backward into the fountain, spilling his peanuts. The year the high school band incorporated pauses to mimic backward steps. The afternoons when the fireflies seemed to blink in time with the imagined rhythm of Tom Delaney's fateful stroll. As the story spread beyond Greene's borders, it captured the imagination of neighbouring towns. Local newspapers published humorous columns describing the quirky law, complete with caricature illustrations of a man walking backward while scattering peanuts across the green. The story was repeated on local radio programs, often punctuated with the sound of laughter, music, or the crunch of roasted nuts. Journalists marvelled not only at the absurdity of the law itself, but at the town's ability to embrace it as a source of pride rather than embarrassment. Greene became a symbol of small-town ingenuity, a community that had learned to transform accident into tradition and whimsy into cultural identity. Visitors began arriving, first in small numbers, then in increasing waves. Families with cameras and notebooks would approach the Greene, observing children performing careful backward walks, and vendors selling peanuts labelled with playful warnings. Some tourists attempted to take part in the ritual themselves, stepping backward along the grass, occasionally stumbling and laughing at their own clumsiness. The townspeople welcomed them with warmth, not mockery, explaining the history, the significance, and the humour that lay behind the ordinance. The summer concerts, once ordinary weekly gatherings, began to take on new layers of meaning. The band, conscious of the law's legendary status, adjusted its repertoire to include subtle pauses and playful variations in rhythm, mirroring the imagined steps of Tom Delaney. Brass instruments would trill as children performed backward walks along the edges of the Greene, and families would clap in time, creating a living, breathing reenactment of the original incident. It was no longer merely music or performance. It was a celebration of collective memory, a ritual woven into the town's identity. Yet, as Greene gained notoriety, debates arose within the community. Some newer residents worried that the town was being reduced to a punchline, defined by an absurd law rather than the beauty of its natural surroundings, the friendliness of its people, or its rich history. Council meetings became lively affairs as debates flared between preservationists who saw the law as central to Greene's identity and skeptics who wanted to modernize the town's image for outside visitors. Laughter often punctuated these discussions, but beneath the humor lay genuine concern. How to honor tradition while accommodating the expectations of a broader, curious public. Despite these debates, the town ultimately struck a balance. The backward peanut law was preserved as a symbolic ordinance, no longer strictly enforceable, but celebrated in ceremonial and educational contexts. Children learned the story in schools, tourists observed it during summer concerts, and locals incorporated the ritual into their daily lives in subtle ways. A careful backward step across the Greene, a private laugh while tossing a peanut into a jar, or a quiet nod to the band as they played the waltz that once marked the rhythm of legend. As the story of Greene's law travelled further afield, journalists, travel writers and cultural commentators began to take notice. Articles appeared in regional magazines highlighting the town's embrace of humour and tradition. Headlines such as "The Town Where Peanuts Walk Backward" and "Greene, New York, a law that turns accident into legend," appeared in print, accompanied by black and white photographs of the Greene, the bandstand, and children performing exaggerated backward steps. National radio shows and podcasts occasionally referenced the town, marvelling at the law's absurdity while praising the community's spirit. Greene became a symbol not of ridicule, but of creativity and resilience. A place where the most minor accidents could carry lessons in joy, care, and collective memory. The law also influenced the town's economy, modest as it was. Local businesses benefited from the influx of visitors. Vendors sold peanuts, baked goods, and small souvenirs depicting peanuts and backward steps. The Historical Society added exhibits detailing the law's origins, Thomas Delaney's fateful stroll, and the evolution of the summer concerts into full-scale community celebrations. Donations from visitors helped fund musical instruments, educational programs, and the upkeep of the Greene itself. The law had, in its own absurd way, strengthened the community both socially and economically. Intergenerational connections flourished around the law as well. Grandparents would recount the story to grandchildren, embellishing details, exaggerating Tom Delaney's backward strides, and mimicking the small, comic stumble that had sparked the ordinance. Parents guided children through careful, supervised reenactments, teaching lessons not only about civic history, but about the value of laughter, creativity, and shared memory. Even teenagers, who might have initially rolled their eyes at the concept of a peanut law, came to understand its significance and joined in the reenactments with playful exaggeration. The law also inspired artistic expression. Local painters captured whimsical scenes of children stepping backward across the Greene, peanuts scattered in mid-air, and brass bands playing in exaggerated rhythms. Poets wrote verses memorializing the accident and its humorous consequences. Musicians composed short pieces incorporating pauses and reversed motifs, echoing the backward steps of Tom Delaney. Even photographers found beauty in the ordinary, framing images of peanuts tumbling across grass, children's laughter frozen in time, and fireflies blinking in rhythm with the imagined cadence of the original event. By the early 21st century, Greene's backward peanut law had become a cultural phenomenon. Visitors came not only from nearby towns, but from across the state, drawn by articles, podcasts, and social media posts celebrating the town's unique character. Bloggers documented their experiences, posting photos and videos of backward peanut walks, small reenactments, and interviews with long-time residents. The story, once a local anecdote, had become part of a broader conversation about how communities preserve identity, celebrate humor, and transform minor accidents into enduring legends. Yet, for the people of Greene, the law remained intimate, personal, and profoundly human. Each summer, the Greene would fill with music, laughter, and playful reenactments. Children performed backward walks under the careful supervision of parents. Adults smiled knowingly at each stumble, recalling the original accident with fondness. Fireflies blinked in soft, irregular rhythms across the Greene, as if acknowledging the continuity of tradition. The law was not merely remembered, it was lived. Through it all, Greene maintained a quiet humility. The law itself was absurd, but the town's embrace of it was sincere. Visitors marveled not at the ordinance, but at the people who honored it with joy, care, and imagination. Scholars referenced it in studies of civic humor and tradition. Journalists wrote feature articles highlighting the town's ability to turn mishap into legend. And yet the residents of Greene understood the deeper truth. The law was never about rules, fines, or enforcement. It was about community, laughter, and the small moments that bind generations together. Over decades, the backward peanut law became more than a story. It became a rhythm, a ritual, and a shared heartbeat of the town. Even as new generations arrived, the lessons remained. Accidents can become stories, humour can preserve identity, and shared laughter can outlast statutes. Visitors, students and townspeople alike came to understand that the law's true power lay in its ability to connect people across time, generations and experience. And so Greene thrived. The Greene remained a stage for music and play. The bandstand continued to host concerts with pauses that honoured backward steps. Children practiced careful, playful motions, their laughter echoing the joy of decades past. Vendors sold peanuts labelled "forward only" with a wink. Tourists observed, participated and marvelled. Scholars studied, journalists wrote, and the story of Greene, New York, spread beyond the hills, rivers and maple-lined streets. Through it all, the heart of the story remained unchanged. Thomas Delaney's backward walk, the spilled lemonade, the laughter of children, and Constable Clara Haynes' watchful, amused gaze. That single moment, born of whimsy and accident, had grown into legend. It was a lesson in humour, community, memory, and the enduring power of small-town storytelling. Greene, New York, had turned a single summer evening into history. A law, absurd and playful, had become legend. And through it, the town had learned that identity is not just built through statutes or regulations, but through shared stories, laughter, and the quiet moments that endure across generations. Greene in the spotlight. By the early 2010s, the story of Greene, New York, and its famous backward peanut law had grown far beyond the borders of the small-town Greene. What had begun as a minor mishap, Thomas Delaney walking backward with a paper bag of peanuts during a summer concert, culminating in spilled lemonade and laughter, had become a cultural curiosity, an emblem of small-town charm, and a story that resonated with audiences far from upstate New York. It began gradually, almost imperceptibly. A regional travel magazine, in a feature about quirky Americana, mentioned Greene in passing, describing it as the town where peanuts are only eaten forward at concerts. The article, light-hearted in tone, drew attention from curious readers who had never before considered the notion that peanut-eating posture could be the subject of law. Small towns, after all, were often overlooked, but Greene, with its blend of humour, pride and community spirit, suddenly became a destination. Soon after, a journalist from a larger metropolitan paper arrived, notebook in hand, eager to witness the Greene and its famous law firsthand. She interviewed children performing carefully supervised backward steps, vendors selling peanuts with humorous warnings, and townspeople who recounted the original incident with theatrical flair. Her article, published in the Sunday edition, described Greene as a place where history, humour and community converge in the most unexpected ways. Following that, radio hosts began mentioning Greene in humorous segments. Late-night talk shows joked about it, calling the town the only place in America where snack orientation matters. Clips circulated online, and soon the story of Greene's backward peanut law became a staple of discussions about small-town eccentricities. The town, once quiet and largely unknown outside its region, had entered the spotlight. The residents of Greene were at first bemused. Older generations who had witnessed the original incident and the passage of the ordinance recalled the story fondly and took pride in the recognition. "It's just a story," some would say with a twinkle in their eye, "but it's our story." Younger residents, however, were more sceptical, worried that the town was being reduced to a punchline. Its identity boiled down to a single absurd law. They worried that visitors would laugh without understanding, that tourists would observe without appreciating the deeper meaning of tradition, memory, and community. Despite these concerns, the town embraced its newfound attention with careful humour and hospitality. Greene had learned to balance pride with humility, ensuring that visitors were not only entertained but also educated. Signs on the green explained the law, its origin, and its significance. Vendors sold peanuts in bags clearly marked "forward only," sometimes accompanied by humorous instructions for proper peanut etiquette. Tour guides recounted the story to curious travellers, emphasizing the role of laughter, accident, and shared experience in shaping the town's identity. Summer concerts became increasingly elaborate. The band, now aware that Greene's fame had grown beyond local borders, incorporated playful elements into their performances. Pauses were timed to mimic the rhythm of a backward walk. Brass instruments played exaggerated flourishes, and percussion echoed the gentle stumbles of Tom Delaney decades ago. Children performed choreographed backward steps at the edges of the green, supervised by parents who ensured safety while encouraging playfulness. The town had transformed a minor mishap into a living theatrical performance. Visitors responded with delight. Families arrived early to claim spots on the green, children in tow, eager to witness the reenactments. Adults laughed openly as the young performers mimicked the original incident. Photographers captured images of peanuts scattering across the grass, children's wide-eyed expressions, and the band striking exaggerated poses mid-note. Tourists were captivated not only by the law's humour, but by the town's careful attention to preserving its story with dignity and warmth. Journalists returned, curious to explore the law's impact on the community. Some wrote feature stories, highlighting Greene as an example of how small towns could maintain identity and tradition in the modern era. Others focused on the sheer absurdity, juxtaposed with the town's seriousness in maintaining the story. Social media amplified these stories, and hashtags like #SheBackwardPeanutLaw and GreenNEY began circulating online, drawing attention from audiences far beyond New York. As national attention grew, Greene found itself navigating a delicate balance between fame and authenticity. Town meetings discussed visitor management, safety measures, and ways to preserve the essence of the law while accommodating the influx of curious outsiders. Residents debated whether to stage official reenactments, create official merchandise, or even build a small museum dedicated to the story. The consensus was clear: preserve the story, honor the tradition, and ensure that humor and history remained intertwined. The law had also begun to influence civic education. Schools incorporated it into lessons on local history, teaching children not only about municipal procedures and ordinances, but also about the power of storytelling and community identity. Children learned that laws could carry meaning beyond enforcement, that humor and accident could shape culture, and that small events could resonate across generations. Teachers emphasized empathy, shared memory, and the importance of celebrating unique aspects of local heritage. Intergenerational connections flourished. Grandparents recounted the story of Thomas Delaney to their grandchildren, embellishing the details with each retelling. Parents guided their children in careful backward steps across the Greene, using the ritual as a tool to teach responsibility, balance, and the joy of participation. Even teenagers, initially skeptical, embraced the performance aspect, participating with playful dramatics that honored the story while adding their own creativity. Greene's economy benefited from the law in subtle but meaningful ways. Local businesses sold peanuts, souvenirs, and memorabilia related to the backward peanut walk. The Historical Society established exhibits featuring photographs, newspaper clippings, and artifacts such as Tom Delaney's original paper bag. Donations from tourists funded the maintenance of the Greene, instruments for the band, and educational programs for children. What had begun as a minor humorous law had grown into an economic and cultural asset for the town. Artists found inspiration in the story. Painters depicted whimsical scenes of children performing backward walks, peanuts scattering mid-air, and musicians playing with exaggerated flourishes. Photographers captured moments of joy, sunlight glinting on peanut shells, and the laughter of children frozen in time. Musicians composed short pieces with backward motifs and playful pauses, echoing the rhythm of the original incident. Writers and poets wove the law into verses, celebrating its humor, absurdity, and the deeper message of community connection. By the mid-2010s, Greene had become a destination for curious travelers and cultural enthusiasts alike. Visitors arrived from across the country, eager to witness the story firsthand, photograph the Greene, and participate in the carefully supervised backward peanut walks. Bloggers documented their experiences, posting photos and narratives that spread the story further. Social media amplified the tale, ensuring that Greene's law reached audiences who might never set foot in the town, yet who were captivated by the idea of a law born from accident, humour and shared experience. Despite the fame, the residents of Greene remained grounded. They understood that their identity was not defined solely by a quirky law, but by the community that had preserved it with care and affection. The backward peanut ordinance was a symbol, a narrative thread connecting generations, a reminder that shared humour and memory could strengthen social bonds. Visitors marvelled not at the law itself, but at the people who nurtured it, celebrated it, and integrated it into the rhythms of town life. The law also became a source of civic pride. Each summer, the Greene was alive with activity, laughter and music. Children's backward steps were precise yet playful, echoing the rhythm imagined from decades earlier. Families clapped in time, encouraging young performers and smiling at every stumble, understanding that the occasional mistake was part of the story. Vendors sold peanuts with the familiar forward-only label, maintaining the humour while honouring tradition. Fireflies blinked in time with the music, creating an atmosphere that seemed both magical and timeless. As Greene's fame spread, cultural commentators began analysing the significance of the law. It was cited in studies of civic identity, small-town humour, and the ways communities preserve history. Writers emphasized that the backward peanut law was not an example of arbitrary bureaucracy, but a testament to the capacity of storytelling, accident and laughter to shape a community's cultural legacy. Greene became a case study, a small town demonstrating that absurdity and dignity could coexist in a single narrative. Yet, for the residents of Greene, the law's importance was never theoretical. It was lived, experienced, and celebrated. Each summer, as the band played its carefully timed compositions, children performed backward steps across the Greene, and adults watched with quiet affection. The town relived the original incident. Each peanut that tumbled across the grass, each exaggerated stumble, each laugh was a link in a chain of memory that connected past, present, and future. Thomas Delaney's backward walk, the spilled lemonade, and Constable Clara Haynes' watchful gaze had become immortalized, not only in law, but in the town's collective consciousness. The ordinance had grown into a ritual, a performance, and a cultural touchstone, teaching generations of Greene residents that joy, humour, and shared experience could outlast the most ordinary of events. Visitors and locals alike began to understand that the backward peanut law's power lay not in its enforcement, but in its ability to connect people across time. Every summer, the Greene became a living stage, each backward step a tribute to accident, imagination, and the enduring value of community. Greene, New York, had taken a single whimsical moment and transformed it into legend, a testament to the notion that even the smallest acts, when embraced with care, humour and attention, could shape culture for decades. By the end of the decade, Greene was recognized not merely for the law itself, but for the spirit it embodied. Journalists, scholars and travelers consistently highlighted the town's humor, pride and commitment to tradition. Yet amidst the attention, the residents remained humble. The law had given them notoriety, but it had also given them something far more enduring: a shared story, a ritual, and a sense of identity that no article, broadcast, or visitor could diminish. The backward peanut law had grown into a cultural emblem. It connected children and elders, locals and visitors, past and present. It reminded Greene's residents that small accidents could leave lasting marks, that laughter and storytelling were as vital to civic life as ordinances and regulations, and that the rhythm of a single summer evening could echo for decades. In Greene, each peanut, each backward step, and each shared laugh became part of the town's heartbeat, a living testament to the power of memory, humour, and community. Preserving tradition in the modern world. By the early 2020s, Greene, New York, had fully embraced its identity as the town of the backward peanut law. The original incident, a seemingly trivial mishap involving Thomas Delaney, a bag of peanuts, and spilled lemonade during a summer concert in the 1930s, had become a cultural touchstone, a story that connected generations and a beacon for visitors seeking a glimpse of small-town charm. But as Greene's fame spread, the town faced a new challenge: how to preserve tradition in a modern world, where regulations, liability concerns, and public safety standards had become ever more stringent. The challenge arrived quietly at first. One spring morning, a state inspector visited to review permits for the upcoming summer concert series. She checked crowd management plans, safety procedures, and vendor licenses, her pen moving methodically across a clipboard. Then, casually, she asked about the backward peanut law. "You're telling me," she said slowly, pen poised, "that it's illegal to eat peanuts while walking backward at a concert?" The clerk behind the counter, a lifelong resident who had grown up hearing the story, nodded. "That's right," he said, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "It's been tradition for decades. We keep it mostly ceremonial now." Weeks later, an official letter arrived recommending that Greene review all outdated or potentially hazardous ordinances. The backward peanut law was specifically mentioned. While the tone was polite, it implied that in modern contexts such a law could be viewed as impractical, even risky. The town responded with characteristic humour, warmth and deliberation. The mayor called an emergency council meeting, convening the townspeople in the small chamber that overlooked the green. The discussion was spirited. Long-time residents argued passionately for preserving the law, not for enforcement, but for its symbolic significance. They recounted the original incident, the laughter it had sparked, and the generations of children who had performed careful backward steps on the Greene. "The law isn't about rules," said Mrs. Dalton, the general store owner. "It's about who we are as a town. It reminds us to laugh, to honour our history, and to take joy in the small moments." Others, mostly newer residents, expressed concern about outside perceptions. "People will see us as absurd," one remarked. "We're more than peanuts and backward steps. We have history, culture, natural beauty. We don't want to be defined only by this." Council members listened carefully. There was laughter, gentle teasing, and debates that stretched late into the evening. The consensus was clear: preserve the law, but modernize its application. It would remain symbolic, celebrated ceremonially rather than enforced strictly, ensuring that tradition lived on without risking public safety or civic credibility. To mark this compromise, Greene installed a modest bronze plaque on the Greene, the Peanut Ordinance of Greene. In honour of laughter, music, and the joy of walking your own way, may we always remember to move forward, together. Established 1930-something, preserved 2003. The dedication ceremony was a festival of sound, colour and humour. Children marched in peanut costumes across the Greene, mimicking backward steps under the watchful eyes of parents and townspeople. Bands played waltzes and marches with playful pauses, ensuring the music reflected the rhythm of that long-ago summer evening. Visitors clapped, laughed, and joined in small reenactments, creating a living, interactive tribute to the law's origins. With the law now firmly preserved as a symbolic tradition, Greene began incorporating it into civic life in meaningful ways. Schools expanded lessons about local history to include the story, emphasizing its lessons in creativity, community, and the power of storytelling. Children learned that laws could carry meaning beyond enforcement, that humor and accident could shape identity, and that small moments, like a single backward step, could ripple across generations. Tourists, meanwhile, found themselves enchanted. They arrived with cameras, notebooks, and curiosity, eager to witness the backward peanut ritual firsthand. Vendors sold peanuts clearly labelled "forward only," and the general store offered commemorative mugs, T-shirts, and miniature bronze peanut figurines. Families took part in carefully supervised backward walks on the Greene, laughing at their own clumsiness and sometimes spilling a peanut or two in homage to Thomas Delaney's original stumble. As the years passed, Greene's backward peanut law evolved beyond local significance. Cultural commentators cited it as an example of how communities could preserve humour and identity in the modern age. Writers highlighted it as a case study in civic creativity, a law that transformed an accident into legend, laughter into ritual, and a minor incident into a source of pride, education, and tourism. Social media amplified the story further, with hashtags like #BackwardPeanutLaw, #GreenNewYork, and hashtag Peanut Parade, connecting Greene to audiences far beyond the hills and rivers of upstate New York. The town's economy, modest but steady, benefited from this attention. Local businesses flourished during summer events, selling snacks, souvenirs, and artisanal goods. Donations funded historical exhibits and music programs, supporting the town's schools and band. Greene had taken what could have been a trivial law and leveraged it to nurture both culture and commerce, ensuring that tradition remained financially sustainable without being exploited. Artistic expression around the law flourished as well. Local painters depicted whimsical scenes of backward-walking children, peanuts scattered across grass, and bands performing in exaggerated rhythms. Poets and writers immortalized the story in verse and prose, capturing the humor, absurdity, and deep meaning of the law. Musicians experimented with playful tempos and pauses, crafting compositions inspired by the imagined rhythm of Thomas Delaney's backward steps. Greene had become a hub for creative interpretation, a place where an old law inspired ongoing cultural production. Intergenerational engagement remained at the heart of the law. Grandparents recounted the story to grandchildren with flair and embellishment. Parents guided children through playful yet careful reenactments, and teenagers participated with dramatic interpretation, learning the humor and history in equal measure. The law had become a shared language across generations, a symbol of continuity, creativity, and collective memory. Even quieter, ordinary moments reflected the law's enduring presence. A resident walking along the Greene in early morning light might take a subtle backward step, remembering the original story. Children might toss peanuts playfully across the grass, imagining the scattered shells of decades past. The band might pause mid-note to honor the rhythm of the first backward walk, and fireflies would blink across the Greene in soft, irregular pulses, as if acknowledging the persistence of memory. The law's preservation also reinforced Greene's broader civic identity. It reminded residents that small actions could ripple outward, influencing perception, identity, and community culture. Humor, care, and shared tradition were recognized as powerful as statutes, regulations, and public policy. Greene had proven that legislation, even absurd legislation, could serve a purpose far beyond enforcement. It could foster belonging, creativity, and pride. By the mid-2020s, Greene had become a model for other small towns seeking to preserve tradition in a rapidly changing world. Visitors studied the backward peanut law as an example of civic storytelling, cultural continuity, and the creative use of humor in identity formation. Schools, historians, journalists, and social scientists alike noted that the law's endurance lay not in its authority, but in the community's dedication to memory, performance, and shared laughter. Each summer, the Greene came alive. Children performed backward steps, families clapped in rhythm, and the brass band played with exaggerated pauses. Vendors sold peanuts labelled "forward only," while fireflies flickered in the warm evening air. The bronze plaque commemorated the law, a reminder that accident and humour could shape identity. Tourists laughed, residents smiled, and generations connected through the playful ritual that had once begun with a single stumble and spilled lemonade. The backward peanut law of Greene, New York, had endured not because it was necessary, but because it was meaningful. It taught lessons in care, creativity, humour, and intergenerational connection. It preserved memory, celebrated accident, and reinforced identity. The law had transformed from ordinance to ritual, from story to legend, and from minor mishap to cultural treasure. Even as Greene looked toward the future, with new residents, evolving cultural trends, and the inevitable modernization of civic life, the law remained a cornerstone. It reminded everyone that the past could be honoured, that humour could coexist with history, and that the smallest of actions, a backward step, a spilled peanut, a shared laugh, could leave a legacy lasting decades. And so each summer evening, as the band struck the first notes of the familiar waltz, children performed careful backward steps, parents guided their movements, and residents smiled knowingly. The Greene was alive with music, laughter, and memory. Visitors participated, learned, and left enriched. The law had become more than words on paper. It was a living rhythm of the town, a celebration of humour, community and identity that would endure long into the future. Greene, New York, had preserved tradition in the modern world, not by resisting change, but by integrating it thoughtfully, creatively and humorously. The backward peanut law had become an emblem of civic pride, a tool for education, a source of artistic inspiration, and a story that connected generations. And in that story, each peanut, each backward step, and each shared laugh became a thread in the rich tapestry of Greene's cultural legacy. Greene's legacy, a law that became legend. As the 2010s unfolded, the story of Greene, New York, and its infamous backward peanut law had travelled far beyond the town's maples and green lawns. It was no longer just a curious note in a local newspaper or an amusing anecdote at a county fair. It had become a cultural reference, a symbol of small-town ingenuity, humour, and the capacity to turn an accident into enduring tradition. For Greene, the law had become more than text on paper. It had become a living legend, woven into the very fabric of the town. Visitors arrived from all corners of the state and eventually from across the country, drawn by the tales of a law so absurd it seemed impossible. Some came out of simple curiosity, others because they had read articles in travel magazines, heard radio shows, or discovered social media posts celebrating the town's quirky identity. They arrived with cameras, notebooks and children in tow, eager to witness the Greene, where Thomas Delaney had taken his first backward steps, all those decades ago. They wanted to see the bandstand, the bronze plaque commemorating the law, the very spot where lemonade had once spilled in a minor disaster that would echo through generations. The townspeople greeted visitors with the warmth and charm that defined Greene itself. Long-time residents who remembered the original incident shared stories not as lectures but as performances, complete with exaggerated gestures, laughter and playful reenactments. Children were taught to mimic the backward peanut walk, their small, careful steps a living homage to Tom Delaney's fateful stroll. Parents watched closely, ensuring no one actually toppled over a picnic blanket or tumbled into a bandstand. But the emphasis was always on joy, imagination, and community. The town council had long realized that the law's value lay not in its enforceability, but in its capacity to connect people. When tourists asked why the ordinance had been preserved, the mayor would smile, hands resting on the lectern of the bandstand, and explain, "It's a story about laughter, about memory, and about how a single act, one man walking backward with peanuts, can remind a town to care for itself and each other." It's less about peanuts, less about the steps, and more about what we do together as a community. Over the years, Greene's backward peanut law became a point of local pride. The town's historical society curated an exhibit detailing the incident, the law's passage, and its ongoing role in town culture. Photographs, handwritten notes, and even Thomas Delaney's original paper bag, now preserved under glass, became artifacts of living history. Children's drawings of the infamous peanut spill adorned the walls alongside newspaper clippings and old concert programs. Visitors could trace the evolution of the law, from an ordinance drafted by the council with Constable Clara's careful guidance, to a symbol of Greene's collective memory. The annual summer concert became more than a musical event. It was a celebration of identity, tradition, and shared story. Vendors sold peanuts with playful warnings, "Forward only, please," and children in peanut costumes paraded across the green, accompanied by townspeople clapping in rhythm to the band's melodies. The music itself evolved to incorporate pauses and flourishes that mirrored the backward steps of Tom Delaney, the way the townspeople imagined it might have looked on that fateful night. Even fireflies seemed to participate, blinking in soft, erratic patterns, as if acknowledging the story that had become a living rhythm of the town. As Greene's fame grew, the law became a lens through which journalists, historians, and cultural commentators examined the broader question of how small towns preserve identity. Articles were written not only about the law's absurdity, but about its significance. Writers reflected on how communities could take small events, minor accidents, humorous moments, and spontaneous acts, and transform them into enduring cultural touchstones. Greene's story became a case study in storytelling, in humour, in the preservation of local character in a world increasingly driven by regulation and efficiency. Despite the attention, Greene remained careful to balance pride with humility. Residents understood that their town was not defined solely by a backward peanut law, but by the people, the music, the green, and the countless moments of shared laughter that gave the law its meaning. For newcomers, the law served as an invitation to participate in town life rather than an obstacle. For lifelong residents, it was a cherished reminder that the smallest events could leave the largest legacies. Over time, the law also became an intergenerational connector. Grandparents recounted the story to grandchildren with theatrical flair, gesturing to the green as if it were a stage. Parents led children in playful backward walks, careful to avoid spilling real peanuts, teaching them the story's humour, and more importantly, its lesson, that care, creativity, and shared joy were the foundations of community. Even teenagers who might have initially rolled their eyes at the notion of a peanut law came to appreciate its role in the town's collective memory, performing mock reenactments at the summer concerts with exaggerated dramatics. Greene schools incorporated the story into history and social studies lessons, framing it as a microcosm of civic engagement, humour, and the human desire to preserve memory. Children learned about municipal processes, local governance, and the way laws can reflect both necessity and narrative. But more importantly, they learned about empathy, creativity, and community pride, the values that had allowed a single minor incident to endure for generations. The law's fame also brought practical benefits to the town. Tourists visiting for the peanut story supported local businesses, purchased souvenirs, and contributed to the upkeep of the green and bandstand. Small donations funded educational programs, band instruments, and summer activities, all indirectly connected to the story of Tom Delaney and his backward steps. Greene's economy, modest but steady, benefited from attention that required no exploitation or exaggeration. The story itself was compelling enough. As time passed, the law took on symbolic meaning far beyond its original wording. It came to represent Greene's philosophy that joy, humour and community could be codified not for enforcement, but for remembrance, that small accidents could become the heart of tradition, and that stories, even absurd ones, could bind people together across generations. Visitors marvelled not at the peculiarity of the ordinance itself, but at how the town had transformed a singular event into a living, breathing celebration of humanity. The law even inspired creative interpretations. Local artists painted murals of the backward peanut walk. Musicians composed short pieces incorporating playful backward rhythms, and poets wrote verses capturing the humour and charm of green summers. It became a part of the town's aesthetic, an emblem not of absurdity alone, but of creativity, memory, and shared experience. One particularly memorable summer, a group of international visitors arrived, intrigued by articles they had read online. They observed the backward peanut walk, attended the concert, and were struck not only by the law's humour, but by the palpable warmth of the community. They commented on the sincerity of the town's pride, the joy in the children's laughter, and the careful attention to tradition. For Greene, this was validation. The story had travelled, yes, but its meaning had remained intact. Even in quieter moments, the law lived in subtle ways. Residents walking the Greene on early summer mornings might take an exaggerated backward step, sharing a private laugh with the memory of Tom Delaney. Grandparents recounted tales to grandchildren in hushed tones as the sun set behind the maples. Music floated across the lawns, and fireflies blinked in rhythm with the echoes of past concerts. The backward peanut law had become woven into the town's very rhythm of life, inseparable from its identity. By the late 2010s, Greene's law had achieved something remarkable. It had outlasted the original incident, the spilled lemonade, and even the first council meeting that enacted it. It had transcended the ordinary, becoming folklore, legend, and cultural memory. Scholars referenced it in studies of humour in civic life. Journalists cited it as a testament to small-town resilience and charm. But for the people of Greene, it was, above all, a living story, experienced, celebrated and cherished each summer. At the heart of the town's identity was the simple truth. The law had endured because it mattered not for its authority, but for its meaning. It reminded Greene's residents that laughter, care, creativity and shared experience were more powerful than statutes alone. That a spilled bag of peanuts and a single backward step could teach lessons that generations would remember. That small, absurd acts could echo through decades, shaping a town, its culture and its story in ways far beyond what anyone could have imagined. And so each summer, when the band begins to play and families gather on the Greene, a child might take a backward step, careful not to spill a peanut. The crowd smiles, some clap, and others simply watch, appreciating the continuity of the moment. Fireflies flicker as if in applause. The band plays on. The Greene is alive with laughter, music and memory. Greene, New York, has taken what could have been a trivial accident and transformed it into a symbol of humanity, joy and enduring community. In Greene, every peanut tells a story, every backward step carries a memory, and every concert reminds the world that the most enduring laws are those that celebrate laughter, togetherness, and the delicate balance between order and whimsy. The backward peanut law, absurd though it may seem to outsiders, has become a testament to what makes small towns great. Their capacity to preserve stories, nurture joy, and transform ordinary moments into legends that last forever. And so Greene lives on, forward in its steps, backward only in memory, laughing, celebrating and remembering, one peanut, one note, and one shared story at a time.